Imagine an infinite highway, miles and miles of emptiness under a split sky. On July 14, 2001, two young British travelers were driving through the heart of the Australian outback, chasing a dream of adventure. Peter Falconio and Joanne Lees were a couple in love, traveling the world in an old orange Kombi van. But that night, on one of the most remote and dangerous highways in Australia, something went terribly wrong. A gunshot shattered the silence. Peter disappeared without a trace. Joanne had to fight for her life against an armed man in absolute darkness. And although she managed to survive to tell her story, Peter's body was never found. Today I'm going to tell you about one of the most disturbing crimes in Australian history, a case where justice was served, but answers never came. This is the story of the murder of Peter Falconio. Peter Falconio was 28 years old. Born in Yorkshire, England, he was an adventurous young man eager to see the world. In 1996, he met Joanne Lees at a nightclub. They fell in love quickly and spent years working and saving money with a single goal: to travel the world together. In 2000, they finally achieved it. They bought an old orange Volkswagen Kombi van and began their adventure across Australia. They explored beaches, visited cities, and camped under the stars. It was the trip of their lives. But in July 2001, they decided to cross the desert interior of Australia via the legendary Stuart Highway. The Stuart Highway is one of the loneliest roads on the planet, crossing more than 1,700 miles of red desert with almost no civilization. There are stretches where you can drive for hours without seeing another human being. It's beautiful, but also merciless. On the night of July 14th, Peter and Joanne were heading north toward Darwin. They had just left the small town of Barrow Creek. It was approximately 8 p.m. The road was dark, no lights, no phone signal, nothing. Just the sound of the Kombi's engine and the wind. Suddenly, through the rearview mirror, Peter saw the lights of a vehicle behind them. A white pickup truck with a green canopy approached rapidly, flashing its lights insistently. The driver shouted through the window, "Your exhaust! There are sparks coming from your exhaust pipe." Peter pulled over, worried about a potential fire or breakdown. Joanne stayed in the driver's seat with the engine running. Peter got out and walked to the back with the stranger to check the exhaust. And then, Joanne gunshot. A drive through the night like a knife. She screamed Peter's name, but there was no response. Before she could react, the driver's door opened abruptly. The man was there, tall and burly, with a gun in his hands. He grabbed her violently, tied her wrists with plastic cable ties behind her back, put a sack over her head, and began dragging her toward his truck. Joanne's survival instinct kicked in. She knew that if she got into that truck, she would probably never come out alive. The man pushed her inside the vehicle. But in that moment of confusion, Joanne saw her only chance. With her hands tied and the sack still over her head, she managed to slide out and fell to the ground. She got up and ran into the darkness. She ran not knowing where she was going, unable to see or use her hands, stumbling over rocks and bushes. She heard the man shouting behind her, heard a dog barking, saw a flashlight searching for her. Joanne threw herself to the ground and crawled under thorny bushes. She stayed completely still as the man and his dog passed within meters of her. For 5 hours, Joanne remained hidden. 5 hours of absolute terror, not knowing if the man was still out there or what had happened to Peter. Finally, when she was sure the man was gone, she went toward the road. It was almost 2 in the morning. The truck driver saw a woman staggering on the highway, covered in blood and dust, with her hands tied. He stopped immediately and called the police. When officers arrived, they found the orange Kombi by the roadside with the engine off and doors open. There was a small pool of blood near the back of the vehicle and shoe marks in the sand. But there was no trace of Peter Falconio. His body had disappeared completely. Police began an exhaustive search with tracker dogs, helicopters, and search teams. They combed through the desert for days but found nothing. Investigation quickly became a high-profile case. Media outlets in Australia and the UK covered the story obsessively. A reward of $250,000 was offered, but weeks passed with no breakthroughs. The most important clue was DNA. On Joanne's shirt, forensics found traces of blood belonging to an unknown man. They also found that same DNA on the cable ties and on the Kombi's gear shift. Investigators reviewed security cameras from gas stations in the area and found footage of a white pickup truck with a green canopy refueling near Alice Springs the morning after the crime. The driver was a burly man with a beard. Police published the images, but the man never came forward. Months later, an informant contacted police. He was an associate of a drug trafficker named Bradley John Murdoch. The informant said, "Bradley was on that highway that night, and I think he had something to do with what happened to that English guy." Bradley John Murdoch, 43 years old, a mechanic and truck driver from northern Australia with an extensive criminal record. He had spent time in prison for shooting at football fans in 1995. He was known as an interstate drug trafficker who transported cannabis and amines across the Australian desert. He was a violent, dangerous man with racist tendencies. Detectives interviewed him on November 1st, 2001, but didn't arrest him. They made a crucial mistake. They didn't take a DNA sample. In May 2002, police arrested Murdoch's associate for drug trafficking. Under pressure, the man revealed more details about Murdoch's connection to the case. They also took a DNA sample from Murdoch's brother, and it showed a familial match with the crime scene DNA. It was him. Bradley John Murdoch was the man who had attacked Peter and Joanne. But when police went to arrest him, Murdoch had disappeared. He fled and remained a fugitive for months. Finally, on August 22nd, he was captured by South Australian police in connection with another case. Police took advantage of his detention to finally obtain his DNA sample. The result was conclusive. Bradley Murdoch's DNA matched perfectly with the blood found on Joanne's shirt. According to forensic experts, it was 150 quadrillion times more likely that this blood belonged to Murdoch to any other person on the planet. On November 24, 2003, Bradley John Murdoch was formally charged with the murder of Peter Falconio and the assault and attempted kidnapping of Joanne Lees. The trial began on October 17, 2005, at the Supreme Court of the Northern Territory in Darwin. It was one of the most high-profile trials in Australian history. The court building had to be renovated of $900,000 Australian dollars to accommodate hundreds of journalists. Murdoch pleaded not guilty. His defense argued that the DNA could have been accidentally transferred at a restaurant or planted by unknown persons. But prosecutors proved these theories were impossible. The evidence was overwhelming. DNA at multiple locations, security camera footage placing him at the scene, vehicle records showing his movements, and most importantly, Joanne Lees identified him, first in photographs and then face-to-face in court on October 18, 2005. Joanne took the stand and relived the worst night of her life. With a trembling but firm voice, she described every detail of the attack. She pointed at Murdoch and said, "That is the man who attacked me. That is the man who killed Peter." There was also a crucial detail. When police searched his truck, they found a hair tie wrapped around the gear shift, a hair tie that belonged to Joanne Lees, with traces of her DNA. Murdoch had kept it as a trophy, not realizing it would be the evidence that would convict him. On December 13, 2005, the jury issued its verdict, guilty. Bradley John Murdoch was convicted of the murder of Peter Falconio and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum period of 28 years, without the possibility of parole. During sentencing, Judge Brian Martin described Murdoch's actions as nothing short of cowardly in the extreme. He said Murdoch showed no remorse, no empathy, no humanity. But there was something Murdoch never did. He never confessed. He never said what he did with Peter Falconio's body. Murdoch appealed his conviction twice. Both appeals were rejected. He insisted on his innocence for years, refused to cooperate with police. But everyone knew the truth. Bradley John Murdoch had murdered Peter Falconio in the middle of the Australian desert, and he kept the secret of the body's whereabouts to his cell. Peter Falconio's case changed the laws in Australia. In 2016, the Northern Territory passed legislation known as No Body, No Parole. This law establishes that prisoners convicted of murder cannot qualify unless they reveal the location of their victims' remains. It was created specifically with cases like Murdoch's in mind, hoping to pressure him to finally reveal where Peter was. But Murdoch never spoke. Not even when he was diagnosed with terminal throat cancer in 2019. Not even when he was transferred to Alice Springs Hospital to receive palliative care in June 2025. Police visited him in his final days. They offered immunity, they offered to speak privately, they told him it was last chance to do the right thing, but Murdoch refused. He said nothing. On July 15th, 2025, almost exactly 24 years after murdering Peter Falconio, Bradley John Murdoch died at Alice Springs Hospital. He was 67 years old, and he took the secret to his grave. When news of his death reached England, Peter's family issued a heartbreaking statement. Peter's father, Luciano Falconio, 83 years old, said, "I wish he had left something so I could find him. Just that. That's all I ask." Police announced that the month before Murdoch's death, they had doubled the reward for information about Peter's body location to 500,000 Australian dollars. But to this day, no one has claimed that reward. No one knows where Peter Falconio is. Some theories suggest Murdoch may have panicked after Joanne escaped and thrown the body somewhere in the vast desert between Barrow Creek and Broome, a stretch of more than 1,200 miles. Maybe he buried it in a place so remote it will never be found. Or perhaps, under the effects of drugs he regularly consumed, he simply forgot where he left it. Colleen Gwynn, the former police officer who led the original investigation, said after Murdoch's death, "Today we mourn Peter, because with Bradley's prolonged refusal to cooperate, the Falconio family's pain has extended for decades. And now that opportunity has been lost forever." Joanne Lees never returned to Australia after the trial. She went back to England and tried to rebuild her life. She wrote a book, No Turning Back, where she told her event and spoke about the trauma that her for years. Peter Falconio's case is many things. It's a story of love cut short. It's a story of survival against all odds. It's a story of imperfect justice. Because yes, the killer was caught and convicted. But Peter's family could never bury their son. They could never close that chapter. They never got those answers. And somewhere in the vast Australian desert, under the starry sky and the scorching sun, Peter Falconio is still waiting to be found.